Hello, my name is Bonnie and this is my channel, A Knitter Obsessed. Welcome. This is my knitting podcast where I typically talk about all of the projects that I'm currently working on. But today I've got a fun little bonus episode for you guys. So today I'm going over my top 10 favorite knitting podcasts here on YouTube. So I asked you guys last week what you would be interested in seeing as a bonus episode in between knitting podcasts, and this was the option that got the most comments in favor of, but only by a margin. You guys seemed actually pretty excited about a couple of other ideas as well. And I will say, spoiler alert, keep your eyes out for those in the next couple of weeks. So you guys should have lots of fun episodes coming your way. But if you would like to hear about some extra content on YouTube, some new creators, I'm sure some of them will be ones you've heard of before, but if you're just curious what I'm watching and what I'm enjoying and what I recommend, stay tuned. So I will say I watch more knitting podcasts than just these 10 that I'm about to mention. However, these 10 are the ones that whenever I see them come up on, my homepage, whenever I know they have a new episode coming out, I'm almost guaranteed to click on it right away. Like, even if I was on YouTube for something else, I'll usually be like, actually, you know what? I think I'll check out, that episode today. So yeah, these are the ones that just, for me, I love every episode they put out. I really don't skip any. They make me really, really happy. And all for various different reasons. So I'm excited to get into this with you guys. I'm going to be knitting while we go through this, since I won't have as much to show you necessarily throughout this. I'll have my hands, free for my knitting. So if you see me look down every now and then, that's what I'm doing. But I would just show you, I am working on my Arthur cardigan, which is by Tricot Designs MCL. This is knit with Miss Babs Yowza in the color Eternity, which is a superwash merino, held with Miss Babs Moonglow, which is their silk mohair. Sorry, forgot what words were for a second. And this is in the color Ziggy Stardust. So this is, I've had this project on the needles for a while, and I've suddenly inspired to get going on it again today, so figured filming was a good opportunity to get a few more rows in on it, which I'm very excited about. I am alternating my skeins of mohair for this, so every now and then, like I said, you might see me look down. It is most likely to untangle some of the yarn situations that I have going on, because this can be just a little bit tedious to deal with, but I'm really liking the effect I'm getting, so I think it's worth a little bit of effort. But getting straight into the podcast recommendations. So I'm going to caveat this by saying these are in no particular order at all. They were just sort of in the order that I thought of them when I was writing them down. And some of them are somewhat newer knitting podcasts that might be slightly smaller channels, but some of them are absolutely massive ones that I'm sure you've heard of before. And so I have a good mix in there. And I wanted to take the time to mention the more well-known ones, because I know when I was first getting into the knitting podcasts, like, now those channels seem really obvious to me because they're, big and they have a lot of followers. But when I was first getting into it, I had no idea who they were. And it took me a long time to find all of these channels and to kind of get into them. And so I figured if someone's in that same boat, I want to be able to give them a head start so they can jump straight into some of those channels, because while they seem big once you're in the community, it is a fairly small community overall, so it can be hard to find them. But without further ado, the first one I wanted to mention, and I do have a little list here, so again, I might be looking down at it just to make sure I don't forget. But the first I'm going to mention is I'll Knit If I Want To with Andrea Mowry. This is, I would say, one of the bigger, everyone knows Andrea Mowry, like, she's everywhere. She has so many designs out there. And I didn't learn about her knitting podcast until fairly recently, maybe a couple months ago. And I don't know, I didn't check it out. I just, for some reason, I wasn't like intrigued by it until I finally realized what her knitting podcast is she does go through what she's working on, and a lot of what she's spinning. She talks about her spinning a little bit more than her knitting, because most of her knitting she keeps fairly secret until the pattern releases. She doesn't talk about that as much. But what she does do is she gets 5 questions from people who follow her, and she answers those 5 questions. So every episode you're getting like really good knitting information or spinning information or just, like various creative outlets. And she's been a designer for a long time. She's made a ton of projects. She's been knitting forever. And so she is this, great resource with just a ton of information to share. And I have been loving this podcast. They're on the more like medium length side. They tend to be about a half an hour each. She does them every Friday. And since I discovered her, I haven't skipped a Friday. I just watch them Friday morning. Sometimes have it on in the background because she's not showing projects. You don't really need to like stare at the screen the same way you do for like a knitting podcast most of the time. And yeah, I adore this podcast. She seems like such a down to earth and cool person, and she's just fun to hang out with for half an hour. And yeah, cannot recommend it enough. Plus she always wears one of her own knits every time she films. And sometimes she'll, wear her new releases, which are always fun to see. And sometimes she'll bring out old ones that have been out for a while. And it's nice to kind of get reminded of some of her patterns. And it's honestly very inspiring because I really do like way Andrea Mowry plays with color and textures and stuff. And so a lot of the times I'll be watching her podcast and be like, oh, hold up, let me go save that pattern on Ravelry. It's really pretty. So yeah, highly recommend that one. So that's I'll Knit If I Want To with Andrea Mowry. The next one is also, I think, a fairly popular channel. It's Well Love Knits. And the knitter for this one, her name is Bethany. And she lives out in Belgium, I believe, but she's originally American. And she just, I don't know, I love the aesthetic of her podcast. It's very like calming and quiet, and she is also a very down-to-earth person. She has I think like an 18-month-old son, and she's expecting her second son soon. And so there's a lot of her podcast episodes are, like, I didn't get very much knitting done this period because I'm busy chasing my kid around and like we're moving our house. And so then she'll take time and just kind of chat about life. And I don't know, I just like the combination of it. I like that it's a little bit more like real life focused than just project focused, and I just really appreciate that with her. She just seems very sweet. I like having her on my screen. She's very calming. Her entire aesthetic is just very, very nice, and the videos are very well put together. She, in my opinion, also does the best knit and chats. Like, they're just so nice. So she had one recently on just, what her life had been kind of rough lately, and she was just being real honest about it and about how she was working on changing her mindset, and how nothing that had to do with knitting. It was very personal, it was very real, and it felt like knitting with a friend. Like I loved that episode. I thought it was fantastic, and I have felt that way about pretty much every knit and chat she's done. She's actually, I will almost seek out her knit and chats more than her podcast updates because I just think they're delightful and I think they're so good. But yeah, she's another one. She doesn't post every week. They can be a little bit more few and far between. But when she posts, I watch the video immediately and I don't even like second guess it. She was also one of the very first knitting podcasts I found. And so like, I feel like I might, have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for her because of that. But like, that doesn't change the fact she's still just one of my favorites. She's absolutely fantastic. So her style, I will say, tends to run a little bit more on like the clean and simple and like classic types of projects. So she's got quite a few petite knits in theirs. She, likes a good stockinette sweater. She likes a good, nice classic line. And I do like watching those types of projects. So if that's something you're interested in, absolutely give her a try. Podcast number 3 for recommendations would be Those Twins Who Knit. So this is a 2-person podcast. They're twin sisters, you can tell by the name, named Rachel and Jessica. And they're from America, out in Kansas City, I believe. And they both are just very prolific knitters. So they have a podcast episode probably every 3 weeks or so. And especially because there's 2 of them, every episode you just get a lot of knitting content. And so it's really nice. You get to see a lot of patterns, a lot of yarn, a lot of finished objects, a lot of whips. They really pack it in. They also have recently gotten into sewing, so most of their episodes, the last few, have ended with some sewing projects and updates. So if you're into that, they're also a great option for that. It's just kind of fun to watch them do more and more with that. I'm not a sewist myself, but it is still really fun to watch. I just like watching people create things, to be totally honest, so it's still really fun to watch. They have a very distinct aesthetic, I would say. It's very much that neutrals and a lot of beige, a lot of creams, little splashes of color, but usually the color is quite muted. Very classic lines in a lot of their projects. And honestly, like, everything they make is just stunning. like jaw-droppingly stunning. So I love watching them for that. And to be honest, that is not my aesthetic. I am not a neutral person. I've never made anything beige. So it doesn't match my aesthetic, but it is such a nice one to watch. Like, it's so calming, it's so lovely. Like, it makes me want to have that as my aesthetic, even though I don't think it's really in the cards for me. And yeah, they're just a joy to listen to. I think I like two-person podcasts a lot. There's another one in this list as well. And part of it is, like I said, the number of things you get to see. But another is the dynamic between the two. So, they're sisters, and you can just very much tell that they're in each other's lives and they're very important to each other. And I like watching the dynamic between them and watching them get excited about each other's projects. A lot of the times when one knits a cool project, the other one will immediately cast it on almost identically, which is just, it's very fun. I love that about them and how supportive they are of each other. And yeah, this is just another one that anytime I see it come up, I will absolutely click on it because I've loved every single episode of theirs I've ever watched. So that's number 3. Podcast number 4. This is another one I'm sure most people have heard of. I feel like most people know this one for sure. It is not a surprise, but Handmade by Florence. Florence Miller is the knitter. She is a knitwear designer as well. She has quite a few patterns out there. And most people, I think, come to her channel because she has a step-by-step sweater tutorial on YouTube where she designed a free sweater pattern and has a video going through entirely how to make it, which is really, really cool. She also has that for socks and a cardigan, I believe. So she's got some great content out there. But I do really, really love just her plain knitting updates. So her podcast updates are great. She's another one who has definitely a very distinct aesthetic. She tends to really like grays and beiges and light blues. They're very muted colors, very pretty, soft colors. And she's done a lot of, the more standard is knitting. She's done a lot of the petite knit and my favorite things knitwear and those types of patterns. But she also, like I said, designs her own, which are really cool. Lately, she's been really into super complex color work, Norwegian ski sweaters, which is really cool and fun to watch and super different. And yeah, she's just fun to watch. She's a very talented knitter and it seems like she can just tackle pretty much anything. So she'll do more complicated cables, she'll do pretty intense color work, she'll do all sorts of stuff, and it's just really fun to watch her go. And then she's also a very fast knitter, so a lot of the time she'll have projects done pretty quickly from week to week, and you can really just see the patterns go through, the projects go through quickly, which is kind of nice sometimes. I'm a slower knitter, so I feel like when I talk about my projects, they can kind of go on from week to week, and you'll end up with me talking about the same pattern for 4 or 5 episodes, which I think is fine. That's how a lot of these podcasts are, and that's totally okay. But it is also kind of cool with Florence, where you're just like, oh wow, you knit that whole sweater already, good for you. So yeah, she's a lot of fun. She just seems very sweet and, again, very down to earth. And she has, I think, a lot of the times when you have these designers making podcast episodes, they really know how to talk about a pattern because they think about the patterns obviously in very detailed ways. And so I'm always really grateful for any insight she has on yarn or patterns or anything like that. So that is Handmade by Florence. The next one is one I actually talked about just briefly on my last podcast episode, but I figured I'd do it more formally here because it is one of my absolute favorite podcasts on YouTube, but that is Denim and Rain. Denim and Rain is done by Sarah, who not only does the YouTube channel, she's also an artist. She also sells little stitch markers and things like that. And honestly, I highly recommend this podcast just because I really, really like Sarah. I think she seems really cool. I know she's just someone on the internet and I'm just seeing like a little slice of who she is. And it's, you know, the internet can kind of lie a little bit, but like, I want to hang out with her. Like, I just think she seems really cool and just, she is fun to listen to when I'm knitting, and I like following along on her projects and all of her various creative outlets. She will show off some of the art that she does, and her art seems really fun. She's done some like fairly nerdy, like Dune themed art and stuff, if you've seen the movie Dune, and I don't know, it's a lot of fun. She's also someone who she knits quite a lot. She also crochets, and I feel like she has a really good mix of knitting with some nicer, you know, more like high-end yarns and materials, but also like she will knit an acrylic sweater. She will knit, you know, with what she has, and she's not snobby, and it's very nice. She just has a very nice vibe. She comes up with some of her own patterns at times. She's not a knitwear designer, but she does, you know, self-draft quite often, or she heavily alters almost everything she knits. And I do really like when people talk about the alterations they made and stuff, and I feel like it helps me, as someone who's fairly new to garment knitting, understand how things can be altered when you get to hear what people are doing from project to project that's different than a pattern. So I really like that aspect of it as well. But yeah, I really like Denim and Rain. I talked about her, like I said, in my last episode, and I'm talking about her again because I think she's fantastic, and I do think you should check her out. So that is number 5. Okay, so I had to move my phone for a second, so I'm hoping I got the angle similar again, but I apologize if I completely changed the filming angle. But my next knitting podcast I want to recommend is Two Purls in a Pod. This is another 2-person podcast. It's done by Paige and Sarah, and they're down in Australia. And I had said with those twins who knit that I really like the 2-person podcast format, and I stand by that here. So Paige and Sarah, the amount that they hype each other up for all of their projects is just insane. Like, they're both just so unbelievably excited for the other one for everything, and it is so much fun, and I get so excited with them. Like, it's super contagious, and for that alone I highly recommend watching them. Like, it's just a good time. But on top of that, they're both really talented knitters. They both knit a wide variety of project types, and so you get a lot of different content in every episode, which is really nice. They both have slightly different aesthetics, and so there's, you know, a little something there for everybody. And yeah, I absolutely love them. I think they're so much fun. Their podcasts tend to run a little bit on the longer side, which is definitely true anytime you get a 2-person podcast going, just because there's twice as much knitting to talk about. So they're a little bit on the longer side. I personally love that because I tend to want to sit and knit and just lose track of time and enjoy myself, and so the longer format for me works really well. But if you're someone who likes a slightly shorter format, you know, you could always watch them in 2 or 3 goes or something like that, which is also nice. But yeah, they're just a ton of fun. I highly, highly recommend them. They're definitely like really good at talking about the little finishing details in all their projects. They do all different types of projects. You'll get accessories, you'll get socks, you'll get sweaters, hats. At one point, I think Sarah knit a water bottle holder recently. You know, like, you get a good mix of different types of things. It's not just garments. And yeah, they're a ton of fun to watch. I seriously cannot recommend them enough. I actually watched their newest episode this morning, and it was a great way to start my morning. So The next podcast I would recommend is one that was brand new this year. She actually started only maybe a month or two before I started mine, and she is one of 2 knitting podcasts that helped sort of encourage me to start my own. So first of all, thank you for that, Allie. I'm about to talk about your podcast. But that is the podcast Allie Makes Everything. So this is, like I said, a newer podcast run by Allie. It's in the name. And she's up in Toronto, I believe. And I just really, again, I like her aesthetic. It's not the gray and the beige aesthetic. She is definitely more colorful. She is a graphic designer in her, regular job. And it comes across in the way she sets up her videos and her thumbnails and in like the things she actually knits. Like she's done quite a few like really interesting color like combinations and patterns and stuff, and it's just, like I said, you can see the graphic designer coming across in the things that she makes, and it's so cool to watch. She even has a video about how she uses her like graphic design software and stuff to mock up her knits before she knits them to make sure she likes the colors. And I don't know, I just like the way that you can tell she's thinking about these patterns, and it's very inspiring for me when I go to think about things I'm going to knit and different yarn combos and all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting to see her perspective on it. Allie is also a very avid reader, and so she ends every single one of her episodes talking about the book she's bought, the book she's finished, recommendations she has, and as I'm sure you could guess based on the fact I always film in my reading corner, I also love reading, and so I love that side of it as well. I love everything about her podcast. I think she's fantastic, and everybody should go give her a watch because she's so much fun. Also, she's got a dog named Copper, and Copper makes an appearance in most of the videos, and if I could get my dogs to be in my videos, they would be in all of my videos, but my dogs are stubborn and don't want to be in front of the camera. So I do love seeing Copper in every video as well. All right. Next up is the other podcast that convinced me to start my own. So this one, I actually ended up getting a hold of this podcaster right before I started my channel because I had just seen her very first episode and I loved it. And I had been on the fence about starting mine. And so I reached out and I was like, hey, I loved your podcast so much. I'm kind of thinking about doing mine and you're making me feel like I can do this. Like, thank you. Like, do you have any, advice? And she got back to me right away. She was very nice and, basically was saying, such a supportive community, you're going to be fine. Like everyone who's gotten a hold of me has been so supportive and I've actually made friends. And honestly, it was why I started my podcast. So that is the podcast Knit Cheek. So knit like this and then cheek like your face. This is run by Natalie, and Natalie is from Southern California. So, fellow California girl, also loved that. And she only has a few episodes out because her and her husband went off to Italy for a couple of months, which is very cool. I've been following her on Instagram and watching her travels there too. She seems like she's having a great time. But yeah, I do love her podcast. She's very much herself, if that makes sense. Like, it comes off very authentic. She's very sweet. She's very quirky, I feel. At least that's how it comes off in the videos. And I love that. Again, it feels like hanging out with a friend. She is a knitter and a crocheter, and I'd say about equally. So, like, her big project in her first episodes is this unbelievably stunning crocheted cardigan that, like, makes me want to learn how to crochet so that I can own that cardigan. It's so beautiful. Yeah, and then she's just, again, I don't know, she just feels very real. She feels like hanging out with a friend, like just someone I could know and hang out with and have a great time with. So I highly recommend her podcast. I'm looking forward to when she gets back from Italy and I can get more episodes personally. So yeah, give her a watch for sure. Another brand new one this year. So, all right, we're coming into the last 2. So number 9 is String Things by Mel. This is with the knitter Melissa. She's also up in Canada, and she is a stay-at-home mom, so you get a lot of updates about her daughter, and she makes a lot of kid clothes and stuff, which I find very, very cute. And she is also just, nice, chill, basic podcast. It tends to follow, the standard structure. She knits a lot, so you get a lot of updates, a lot of good progress in every episode. And she also talks about how much all of her projects cost her. So she will talk about, how much the yarn costs, how much the pattern costs, any shipping costs. And I always find that to be a really interesting piece of information. I honestly wanted to do that for my podcast, but it turns out I'm just not organized enough to keep track of all that information from, I don't know, like immediately falls out of my brain. So she does a good job keeping track of it and keeping a lot of very detailed notes on all of her projects. So she has, she'll take measurements before she blocks and after it blocks, and then compare them to the final schematics in the patterns. And she does a lot of videos that compare very similar projects, like very similar patterns to each other, so that you can see what's different about all of these shirts that might look fairly similar, but they have differences in gauge or differences in finishes and stuff. And those are really interesting videos for sure. So if you're trying to pick between really similar types of patterns, her videos are very helpful to help kind of tease out what the differences are from pattern to pattern. And yeah, she's just, again, she's a really fun person to watch. She'll knit a lot of she'll knit a lot of basics in like these very calm colors that go with everything, but then she'll knit she just knit a lime, neon green cardigan that is amazing. It's so good. So I really like her boldness, her combination of boldness and also making staple pieces at the same time. She has a good mix of the two, and it's really fun to watch. So last but not least, the final podcast I have to recommend is the Fiber Tales podcast. This is by the knitwear designer Fiber Tales. Her name is Lage, and she is from a small island off of Denmark. And she often will show a bunch of shots off of, where she lives in the island, and her parents own a little sheep farm, so sometimes there's little shots of the sheep. And again, I just cannot get enough of the aesthetic. It is so nice and calming, and she just seems so unbelievably sweet and fun to spend my time with. And yeah, and I do absolutely adore Fiber Tales designs. They tend to be nature inspired and have these fun little cute details that look like flowers or bees or little vines on her projects. And I find it's just really sweet and nice. And sorry, my dogs might be a little noisy for a second. If you hear her, I'm sorry. But yeah, and it comes across in her aesthetic when she's talking on her podcast too. She's just very sweet, and you can tell that she absolutely loves where she lives and the island she lives in, and all the nature around her and stuff. And it's very, very cool. She'll do a lot of time talking about her design process and what she's working on. And as I said before, that is something that I super am into and I think is really interesting. And I really like being in the heads of the designers. And so, yeah, I can't recommend hers enough. I think it's super nice. She's one who I feel like I accidentally miss quite a few of her podcasts here and there. And so every now and then I'll have to do a little binge and catch up. And I'm always really excited when that happens. So, yeah. And then I know that was 10, but I just realized, because I thought it was on my list and I don't know how it wasn't on my list. But I have an 11th for you guys because it should have been on my list because I've been obsessed with this podcast lately. It's been my absolute favorite, so I'm not going to not mention it. But that would be the Creabea with Rebecca Clow. So a lot of Rebecca Clow is a super popular designer. I absolutely love almost everything she comes up with. I've yet to knit anything by her, but I do really love what she comes up with. But her podcast is fantastic. So if you haven't seen the Creabea Knitting Podcast, I highly recommend it. She's just adorable and she's so excited about knitting and so much fun to listen to. And I really like, she always has a lot of projects on the go. She really talks about her design process for all of them. And I really like her style. So like not only the patterns themselves, but the yarn she comes up with. She tends to be really unafraid of like a nice bright color combination, which I really appreciate. And yeah, she's great. I think she's just fun to listen to. I've been loving her podcast lately. I follow her on Instagram, and they just got a puppy, and so I'm kind of looking forward to getting updates on the puppy, hopefully in upcoming knitting podcast episodes, but we'll see. But yeah, I can't believe she wasn't written on my list. I feel like I didn't write her down because I didn't feel like I needed to, but then as I was making the list, I forgot to add her on at the end. So there's your bonus 11th one, is the Creabea Knitting Podcast. Cannot recommend enough. She's fantastic. But there you have it. That is 11 knitting podcasts other than myself that I highly recommend you check out if you haven't already. I'm hoping there was something new on there for everybody. I know some of them were slightly bigger podcasts that you've probably already heard of, but I'm hoping, there are at least a few that you might be new to you and that you can go and give a check out or a follow, or, yeah, should be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you have lots of YouTube watching in your future now, and lots of knitting. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Bye.